extraction, they have people that actually shovel what comes off of the belts and put it back into the, like it's, when you think about in situ and those, that technology, it's very labor intensive. So yeah, it's in everyone's benefit to, in companies' benefit to do more of in situ. Yeah.
How does the use of water resources compare between in situ and mining?
I don't have that exact answer for you. I don't know how it compares. I only know in situ. That do you all have that upstream dialogue? Do look through it. That's a very good resource. I think in there you could actually find it. But in situ, it used to be that 3 or 4 barrels of water is required for 1 barrel of oil. Now, that's not fresh water. That could be recycled water. Now, it's down to 2 and 2.1. I think Sanox is at 2.1 barrels of water per barrel of oil. So there has been huge improvement. It's still a lot of water. Now, it's, again, there is very little fresh water that's used. So, for example, at Imperial Oil Cold Lake facilities, the water is recycled 3 times, if you will, before it's dumped, and you have to replace it. So, so it's a good news story how far we've come, but it's still a big environmental concern, and it's still a big headache for the companies. Yeah.
Is it in situ very expensive though, or maybe horizontal drilling compared to mining?
You mean in terms of capital costs?
Yeah.
No, because I was looking at those numbers. I should have written them down somewhere. Capital expense, like if you have 8 pads, for example, and a steaming facility, that would run you between 2 to 4 billion. If you want to start a mine,
What about horizontal?
yeah, like that's horizontal drilling. Like it's very, very rare. Like in Cold Lake even, it was the past 5 years very rare that we did vertical. Everything was horizontal. Horizontal drilling used to be like this big beast that no one would do it, but right now it's a lot cheaper and a lot more companies are able to do it. The technology's there. It's not as big a beast as it used to be. So, and then like even fracking, we've come a long way. But no, like in situ capital costs are, if you consider mine and the operator that you need, I think the minimum investment required is $11–12 billion. That's compared to $2–3 billion for an in situ start.
I would like to know if the telephones are produced also in mining, or they are just for oil sands.
Okay, so oil sands, in situ and mineable, they're both oil sands. So they're both ways of producing the oil sands.
And both produced
No, tailing ponds are only a mining process, basically. And what they do, I have a video, I wasn't sure if I'm going to show it, but maybe at the end I'm going to show that. It's not mine, it's CAPS. But what happens is they put sand and the water into these ponds, and the sand separates from the water, and then they pump the water back and reuse it. So that's what happens. That's only in the mine. Yeah.
There's a really good report by the Pembina Institute that kind of compares mining in situ in terms of environmental impacts. So if anyone's interested, you can just search. It's like Pembina Institute mining versus in situ. It's the first thing that comes up.
What's the conclusion of that?
I think in the source, like in some ways they say one's better, in other ways the other is better. For example, in terms of nitrous oxides, they're both around the same. And then they talk about sulfur dioxides, and that one is the juicers. But I think when they talk about in situ, they talk about SAGD as the baseline, and not those new technologies you talked about.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to say is that when they talk about SO2s, the sulfur emissions, okay, think about it. Mineable, your oil sand is on the surface. Guess what that smell there is? That's sulfur. But because it's on the surface, it comes off. So when you're processing it, yes, in the processing it, you don't have, so there are a lot of those things that like people choose to ignore when they compare one against the other. But I always, they know better than I do, but I always question a lot of those things. Because that sulfur is in that oil sand, it's not much. Now, you produce it from the ground, it all comes out in the process, it's laying there, you can smell it from 5 kilometers away. Should we go to the game changers? Oh yeah, I think we should. Okay, changing the game. What's happened in the last 10 years? Lots of shale gas have been found around the world and in the US. And what's the bigger story is, remember we talked about pipelines and transportation and how you have to get what you produce to your customers? Well, guess what? Shale gas is where it's found is close to the customer. So we're Canadian customers, majority of them, east. Where do they find a lot of shale gas? Quebec. Now, there is some NIMBY opposition to producing it, but they're close to the customer. So it's a lot more cost effective. Same thing in the US. US is a big consumer. They've got a lot of shale gas, and it's right in their backyard. Now, this is what it takes to produce shale gas. And you see, all of this, in US right now, their costs run at, I believe, $4 a gigajoule for the new developments, including capital costs. So, there's a lot of work, because when you have this level of operational intensity, it becomes a manufacturing process. And so you can use a lot of those manufacturing concepts that we've been perfecting over decades and make these more efficient and more streamlined. So there's a whole school of thought that says unconventional oil is a story of manufactured oil. So it's going to be less about the engineer in the room and more about the manufacturing concepts. Now, this shale gas is going to replace the way that the source of gas for us. So look at here. So this is 2040. In 2040, North America is going to use 25% less conventional gas, and it's going to replace it by about 40% of shale. Now look at China. In China, LNG is a big story, followed by local unconventional. Something that maybe 10, 15 years ago didn't seem at all possible. Now Husky is investing, starting to invest in China. So the companies are seeing those opportunities and are moving there. So our shale gas in northern BC, probably not going to pick up because it's going to be very expensive and very hard to get to the consumer. There is a lot of other resources that people can get more readily. Now this is a very very interesting picture, because then comes tight oil. And tight oil and shale oil, apparently they've started producing them in North Dakota, and they thought that they're going to get 250,000 barrels, and now they're